This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Jonathan Bennett and I will be talking this week with Hadrian Zbarcea about all kinds of things, starting with learning from the Apache Way. We'll talk about asynchronous communications and so much more. That's coming up next. FLOSS Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure, even when they are working remotely. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 604, recorded Wednesday, November 11th, 2020. Learning from the Apache Way. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Linode. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Get $100 in free credit when you create your account today at linode.com/twit or text TWiT to 474747 for a direct link to the offer. And by LastPass. Give your IT and security leaders control of password security with award-winning LastPass. Visit lastpass.com/twit to find out how they can help you. Hello, everybody. I'm Doc Searls. I'm here with Jonathan Bennett this week, and we're going to be talking with Hadrian Zbarcea, who is almost too interesting. And I'll tell you more about that when we bring him back on. But first, I have to let you know when I bring the right tab up. Why is it not coming? There it is. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I couldn't bring the tab. Hey, Jonathan, I've lost the.
Hey, Doc.
Here we go.
How are you today?
I have to move my little picture all around the window here. I've got too big a screen. How you doing, guy?
I'm good. I'm good. It's good to be here once again. It seems like it's only been a week since I was here last.
I know. You're just coming off. We're it's a long bench, and we sometimes you come off twice in 8 days. A very active last 8 days, which we won't go into at all. But I think there's a sense of we can get back to other craziness right now. I assume you're still in Oklahoma. I've never seen you escape from Oklahoma.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done a show from anywhere other than here. I do some traveling from time to time, although not very much here recently for various reasons. But yeah, still here. Wave as you fly over. I'm still here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, I used to, I have like almost 2 million miles with United alone, and I have like 70,000 photos up that I've on Flickr alone that I've shot out of the windows of airplanes. And many of those are in Wikipedia for all kinds of stuff. And there's a good chance I'm never going to do this again. I don't know. It's pretty wild. So I won't be able to wave at you very often. So are you familiar yet with Hadrian, our guest today?
I did a little bit of looking. I kind of got tapped for this show at the 11th hour last night. But I've done a little bit of looking into his bio and what he's about. And there's a couple of things I find real interesting. One, he is or was, I'm not sure, the VP of fundraising for Apache, which that should be real interesting. We can ask him some questions about getting funding for open source projects and all of that. And then he's got it looks like a company that he runs. And of course, I don't have the name of it in front of me, but he runs his own company, and they do Apifocal. We'll have to ask him how to pronounce it. But they do, it sounds like, some real interesting things, probably around some of the different Apache projects. But some of the problems he's looking at trying to solve with that company look real interesting too.
Yeah, there's it's all interesting. I mean, I'll boy, I don't know how to make the introduction short when we get to it, but so we'll hurry into the show. But first, I have to let you know that the that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Linode. Managing your complex cloud infrastructure should not be hard. Linode believes in cloud computing for all. They make deploying, managing, and scaling your cloud applications simple. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Why do over 800,000 developers choose Linode? Well, they give you flat pricing across all 11 global data centers, intuitive cloud manager, full-featured API, and they have award-winning customer support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year with no tiers or handoffs, regardless of your plan size. Think of all the things you can do. Host your website, build your app, store, or backup media. It's up to you. Easily launch and enrich your developer applications, hosted services, websites, AI and machine learning workloads, gaming services, or CI/CD environments. Launch and scale in the cloud with their virtual machines. Use your $100 credit on S3-compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more, in addition to shared and dedicated compute instances. Be sure to check out Linode's new YouTube channel for video tutorials, security tips, and more at youtube.com/Linode. Bryce Adams from Meritocracy says, from the start, we were looking for a partner, not a provider. Some of the large providers see us only as a transaction. Linode is the kind of partner that will be with us from the start, today, and beyond. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. So get started with Linode today. Visit linode.com/twit and click on the Create Account button, and you'll get $100 in free credit. To find out more, visit linode.com/twit. That's $100 in free credit when you create your account today. Linode.com/twit or text TWIT to 474747 for a direct link to the offer. Okay, so welcome to Floss Weekly. Our guest is Hadrian Zbarcea, who, as you may know, I have a project called Project VRM that's been at Harvard's Berkman Center for 14 years now, and is basically all about personal empowerment and urging development that gives added power to users, to individuals, and solving market problems from the customer side. It's not an easy thing for people to grok, and though there are many developers working on that kind of thing, and that I've encouraged, but I don't get many people coming along that get it beyond the level that I even meant them to get it. And Hadrian's one of those. And among other things, he's been a fundraiser and much more for Apache, a real Apache veteran. But beyond that, he's doing so many other things. I took such long notes in preparing for this. We even did another podcast. The other podcast I do was like prep for this one. That's at Reality 2.0. You can go to that after this if you're digging his stuff. So I'd like to welcome him, Hadrian Zbarcea. You there, Hadrian? There he is.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
It's great having you here. So you're in D.C. or roughly close to D.C.?
Yes, 20 miles south in Maryland.
Yeah. So maybe we could start, and since I know that Jonathan also has some questions teed up on the Apache front, give us some of what you were doing with Apache and what some of your learnings from there, where those go, especially in respect to other volunteer efforts.
Oh, how much time do we have? Apache
about 50 minutes.
I was just kidding.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I got involved with Apache directly in 2006. That's when my first commit happened. But of course, I used the Apache software before that. And it's interesting because to me at the time, although I was quite accomplished in my career by the time and all that, there is some sort of blockage. You don't really have the courage to interact with these communities, because they they seem such in an elevated place and they do such interesting things. And I was encouraged to interact with them kind of the same way I was encouraged to interact with your project. And my history with Apache started in 2006. And at the time I was working for Iona, which I think was the best company I worked for in terms of engineering skills. The team at Iona was absolutely fantastic. And Iona was acquired by Progress in 2008. But at Apache, I was involved in a few projects related to integration and messaging. Basically, the projects that are the foundation of all the open source ESBs on the market today. So that's, and I for over a decade, I spent 100% of my time in open source. What's interesting about Apache is the way it's organized, because it's a different foundation than the other open source foundations that are very well known, like, of course, Mozilla, the Eclipse Foundation, not to mention the Linux Foundation, which I think is the biggest at the moment. But Apache and its license was created by volunteers for the public at large, not for companies. And even today, Apache recognizes individuals, not companies, as contributors to the code. I'm not sure if it's obvious. It's kind of a subtle distinction, but a very important one. Instead of me going on and talking about stuff, I'm curious what you're interested in. So how about you ask me more targeted questions, and we can go into directions you prefer.
Sure, I'll jump in and take the next one. I'm very curious about the fundraising there at Apache, and I'd kind of like to dig more into that idea that Apache is not a corporation like some of the other foundations tend to be. What exactly do you mean by that, and how does that kind of play out in everyday practice?
Wow, that's an interesting subject. So let me start with the way the Apache is organized. So once you start interacting with the communities, be it sending an email or creating an issue, raising an issue in the US Jira, you are a collaborator to the project, a contributor, because you actually spent some time, you contributed to the project something. And that, in the Apache lingo, starts building karma for you. And at some point, maybe you're gonna submit some patches, some code, and they will be reviewed by the committers on the project. The committers are those who can actually modify the code. And if they like it, they will commit it to the code. They might interact with you. That's the usual ceremony. But if you consistently create good contributions patches, you will be invited to join the committer community. Well, you're part of the larger community already. And that gives you the rights to modify the code. And again, Apache doesn't care if you're paid by a company to do that or not. You're treated as an individual over there. And after that, you become a PMC member. PMC stands for the Project Management Committee, which is the committee that looks beyond just the code, that looks at the community growth, the legal aspect of releases, and so forth. And this PMC has a chair, which is an Apache VP, and actually is the liaison between the community and the board. When there is contention, everything is solved by voting, and Apache strives to achieve consensus, so people have to talk until they resolve their disputes, and that is true for releases as well, right? If somebody says there's something wrong with the release and vetoes it, basically you have to fix the issue or convince the person that it's actually not an issue to remove his veto. So it's a very, very interesting way to collaborate in open source that I didn't see in any other place, really. It happens in some informally, but Apache formalizes it very well. And then if you're involved in multiple projects, you get invited to be a member of the foundation itself, not a member of just the project, but a member of the foundation. And then you're eligible to run for board, have officer position in the foundation, and all that. So I was the VP for Apache Camel, which we started in 2007 for 3 years. And then after I became a member and all that, and I was the VP for fundraising for 3 years. I don't remember. It stopped maybe 4 years, 4 years ago or so. What's also interesting is the budget of the foundation. When I started, it was a bit over $500,000 a year, if I recall correctly. And then after 3 years, when I left, it was over $1 million. And for the number of projects that Apache manages, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny budget. And this being the intro, the answer to your question is a bit complicated because Apache doesn't offer anything to the sponsor. So the job of the VP for fundraising is quite hard. There are many companies actually who would have sponsored or contributed much, much more, but they had to justify to the management that expense. And we don't offer support for projects. We leave the commercial companies to do that, we meaning Apache. We don't offer tickets. We did a few for ApacheCon, but ApacheCon is the biannual conference organized by Apache once in North America and once in Europe, so twice a year. So because you don't basically give any benefit to a company, it's very, very hard to acquire funds. I should probably mention that the platinum sponsor for Apache are, the usual ones that sponsor probably all the major foundations, Google, IBM, Microsoft, and so forth. They are on the Apache side. Did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Definitely brought up some other questions, though. You mentioned this idea of karma, and I'm curious, is that actually a quantified value? So is there a database somewhere of every person that's interacted with an Apache project has an X value for their karma value?
Interesting question, and I also stayed away from mentioning another word, which is meritocracy. So Apache was very proud to be a meritocracy, and this karma was the way you acquire merit. No, it's not quantified. It's very subjective, actually. It's in the eyes of the current community members, PMC members, who discuss and try to decide if the person acquired enough karma, would be a valuable asset to the community and all that. And sometimes there are people who contribute for years and after many years become committers or never, and other people become committers in a few months. Of course, good mentorship helps because there are many details to look at, and with some mentorship, basically you know how to find your way around the project, what's important and all that. But no, it's nothing quantified. It's not there's no database besides the code that's visible to everybody. Of course, the issues, the Jira, and the mailing lists, which are very important because Apache insists that all the decisions have to be made or at least recorded on the mailing lists. So there are no decisions made on Slack or other channels.
So we had a guest on FLOSS Weekly, and this has been several years ago now. But we had a guest that we were talking about some different issues, and the guest made the statement that meritocracy has to die. And I was not even co-hosting that day; I was just listening. But I had to scratch my head and say, "Wait a second! If we kill off meritocracy, then by what standard do we decide on whether to or not to accept pull requests, if not by judging the code?" So I'm curious, is this the path that Apache sees towards the future? Is it going to continue to be a merit-based system, or are they looking at some of the other options and things that get thrown around in that space?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to ask. I guess that if you ask, board members or other people, you're gonna get different answers. I mean, even among themselves. I know what you're talking about. I'm aware of that trend. It did impact Apache somewhat, not too much. Words can be deceiving, so yes, that's why I try to stay away from the contentious meritocracy word as well. But regardless of how we call them, contributions are still made or accepted based on their merit of, code quality. Mm-hmm. There are new positions, I think a VP for, diversity or something like that. There is a code of conduct that didn't exist before that was made maybe 5 years ago, and it's not unique to Apache. Pretty much all the foundations at the time tried to create a code of conduct, deal with trolling and what happens in social media. I don't see this as an important part of Apache, even if it's social life. I think what makes Apache stand out is the quality of the projects they shepherd there.
So, you said earlier, and I may have been on this call or may have been on one of the many other conversations we've had, and I wrote it down, the most interesting revolution of the late 90s were the Apache server and the Mosaic browser, and how now people could publish their own data, which led to great dynamism in culture and markets. I think you said more than that, but that's what I got to write down. I have a couple questions, one which we can take separately, but the first is, have you imagined out what might be the next one of those? Because I felt personally like, especially in the late 90s, the web we have today, regardless of the fact that it's full of, we're talking constantly now about how the giant platforms are dominating it, but the web itself is web servers on one side and browsers on the other side, and that was the dynamism that was created in the mid to late 90s, and we're still there, but we haven't had another one of those that works for individuals. I think you have a really important insight and an important point to make, that Apache really depends on individual input. It's not just as a website server. It's, the client, people with clients have real input into this thing. But what's the next revolution? What's the next thing, the revolution that starts with each of us that we can use in the world? And the second part of that, and you may or may not want to go into this in replying to that question, is what's asynchronous, the whole area of asynchrony. And because HTTP and the way we're using the web for the most part, even though we're just supposed to be looking at documents, that's what Tim Berners-Lee came up with in the first place, but we're seeing it as a real-time medium rather than as something that has store and forward in it, and a lot of possibilities that we're familiar with email, but not much beyond that. So those are sort of two separate questions, but I'd like to address both of them.
I think that it's more than two questions there. And yes, we had absolutely interesting conversations in the past months. They got me thinking a lot, and I realized more things after even our last conversation, I think last week when it was. So what we were talking about was the fact that in the 90s, we had platforms like CompuServe and AOL, and in order for you to publish your data, you had to be on the platform to do something, which is eerily similar to what happens today with, all of them, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And then the Apache server comes along, which wasn't a new technology, really. The Apache group took it in 95. It was public domain already, and turned it into what it became. And then the foundation started in 99. So that allowed everybody to basically host a web server and publish whatever content they want. But publishing is not enough. You have to have the other side, the consumer side, and that niche was filled by the Mosaic Netscape browser that allowed in your single window, in your browser window, to see the content published by any publisher using, of course, HTTP, HTML. And in a way, I think that model became the victim of its own success, and the success is, huge, undeniable. What I got to realize, and we didn't talk about this, I only realized it recently, because we had a very brief conversation, but I had the same conversation with others about licenses. And many people are fans of the GPL license. And the Apache license is different, not only that it's permissive like MIT or BSD. Again, this is a very subtle point. There is the famous clause 5, I think, in the Apache license that says that one contributor cannot put code in open source under the Apache license that knowingly infringes of one of its patents. And what's important about this is that unlike the copyleft licenses that try to protect the author, the Apache license tries to protect the downstream user. And this protection of the user, I think, is common with what we talked about in Project VRM. And unfortunately, later on, Apache got a lot of projects that basically served the enterprise, and it diverged, in my opinion, a little bit from its own original intent of serving the customers, the users. And I see this trend coming back right now. It's not really clear what people try to achieve sometimes, but I think it wasn't very clear to the Apache group at the time either. So to me, it feels like history kind of repeats itself again at another level. I don't know if you want to go more into the technology required for this to happen, right? The sovereign individual and all that. But besides HTTP, we have other systems that run at a massive scale and were very resilient in time. And these are obviously the email and the DNS that do not run on HTTP. And they are asynchronous in nature and hierarchical and distributed. And I think that's where the future is. I think people realize that after blockchains became popular, but I don't think it's really clear how this is going to be achieved. Of course, I have my opinions, but we can talk about them if you want.
Yeah, so actually, I want to just drift back toward licenses for a second, and I'm wondering, I don't have any numbers on this, I don't even have any sense of it beyond, it usually seems to me when I'm talking to developers, they're either in the copyleft camp where it's like GPL or nothing, or at the other end where it's, I want the most permissive possible license, so I don't even have to worry about it. So I'm going to choose BSD or something. But do you know what percentage of new developers choose the Apache license versus others?
I've seen some statistics. I don't remember them. I know that Apache, maybe 5-6 years ago, started to become the most prominent license used. And even the new small foundations like Coursera, we talked about that they just model their operations after Apache. So I think it depends on the motivation, and you cannot talk about that without understanding the motivations of the group that creates the open source technology. So if they want to commercialize it somehow and they want to be protected, many a time they will choose some copyleft license, which to me is short-sighted because I mean, that's fine, but you have to get there. And these copyleft licenses hurt adoption massively, as we learned with the Apache projects. So if you have a permissive license, you're going to have if the code quality is good, much better adoption, but then you're going to have a problem in protecting your IP when you commercialize and what exactly you're going to offer, licenses or support. So to me, it's a matter of choice. There is no really right or wrong answer. And it depends on what people want, their understanding of licenses and open source at the time and all that.
So let's go to asynchrony as a topic, as a category. You in fact are I have been so steeped, like everybody else, in the world of HTTP, and the assumption I think that the world has made to a large degree that the operating system of the world is the browser, runs on HTTP and is HTML and its derivatives and a bunch of stuff you can ladle on top of that, like JavaScript, and that's the world we live in. You're going to have to fit your business or your project or whatever it is into that world. Which, even though I lamented that we got stuck in client server, which I've been told, and it might be apocryphal, is really a euphemism for slave master, or what some of us in the VRM development community call calf cow, where you're the calf always going to the cow for the milk of HTML and cookies. And but one of the things that you turn me on to is thinking, well, what about the store and forward world, which we've barely, at the open source level, at the standards level, have kind of left fallow, where, and especially where, look, how does shipping work in the real world? It is all store and forward. So we live on store and forward, especially now in COVID time. We're getting our food by store and forward of a sort, and there are lots of businesses that can exist on top of a new routine or new protocols or old protocols we just discovered. I mean, it's significant to me that I think that the RFPs for the IETF for what the email we do today were issued in the mid '80s. I mean, that's when POP3 and IMAP and SMTP were first crafted. I might be wrong about that, and it may be later than that. I don't know. What matters, though, is it took a while before those got adopted, but it changed the world. And it seems to me that there's a similar opportunity now by thinking outside the HTTP, HTML box toward what can be done and what businesses and new things could be developed on top of that. And you're the first person to talk to me about this. So I'd like to hear you hold forth on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a large area. I don't know how to focus this conversation. I will start with the fact that it's not really an HTTP issue. You use email and you use a probably browser client. I'm not sure if you use Gmail or Outlook.
Yeah, I don't. I use my own client, but
so
yeah.
There's no issue with HTTP, really. It's more one of architecture and topology. The fact that, and I'm shocked that people don't realize that the value of store and forward or asynchronous messaging. And I think, in a way, it's our fault, the engineers' fault of, the early mid-2000s. People do HTTP and microservices, SOA before that, services in general, with HTTP because I think it's easier. They saw so many examples, so many demos, and they copy that. But in order to have better, cheaper services using asynchronous messaging or a store and forward model, you need infrastructure, and that doesn't exist yet. I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to get some information from a web server. What if the server is down? It's up to you to connect again later, decide when, and all that stuff. So all the error handling, if you want, is left to the client. So it's easier to write a server that way when some of the problems are pushed to the client. And the client is assumed to be a human client, with the browser at least. With the APIs, now we have, of course, REST clients. And people realize that implementing something like this, both on client side and server side, is way more expensive than writing smaller apps relying on a existing infrastructure. But that infrastructure doesn't really exist at global scale. It does exist in enterprises, and they use it effectively. But I think it's time to take it from the enterprise and move it to the cloud level and have interoperable worldwide messaging, store and forward infrastructure. I can go into very technical details why it's much cheaper and even faster in some ways. I'm not sure if you want to get into that today.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to get into it. Let's get into it briefly, and then I'll go to a sponsor, and then Jonathan will come back with some questions. So, so dig down a little bit on that, because I think, and here's an angle you might take on it. You were saying earlier, again in another conversation, that and I'll quote from something you said that I wrote down: you have to find a group of people who are willing to make infrastructure, but knowing they won't get rich on it. Not as rich as Jeff Bezos anyway. And this is exactly the Apache model, for example, is actually where the browser came from. I mean, Mark Andreessen wasn't looking to make money with the browser in the first place. I still don't think he wanted to make money on the browser, especially when he went to Netscape. He wanted to improve the browser but make money other ways. And but I want to fire up the imaginations of people who want to make the world that is on new infrastructure, and how we motivate them.
Well, in a way, blockchains are infrastructure, right? Because all the blockchain nodes constitute some infrastructure to which other applications connect. Unfortunately, people in that world tend to stay in that world and don't look outside. And that's my observation. I may be wrong. But let me give you an example, which I gave at some conferences a while ago. I assume you're familiar with the ADT messages in healthcare. It's the messages for admission, discharge, and transfers. Basically, it says that the patient was admitted, some details about the patient, maybe diagnosis, stuff like that. And discharge is when the patient is let go. Transfer, obviously, move to another hospital. So let's imagine that you want to count the available beds in a specific area, right? So it's you have a stream that publishes the ADT messages when somebody was admitted or discharged, and it's very easy to write at the other end, let's call it a client, that increments or decrements based on A or D messages coming in, right? Very easy. Now, let's assume that this works for 1 year, 2 years, everything is fine, but now you have a new requirement. You want to see if there is some epidemic going on in some area. So you don't care about the DNT messages, you only care about admissions. And you want to look at the diagnosis and to see if there are any, if the same diagnosis appears in a period of time, in a time window, in a geographic area above some threshold. So how do you do that? Are you gonna ask the same group that wrote the first application with counting bed availability to modify their app, or do you want to write another one? If you want to write another one, the people who write the app that sends the messages, now they have to send the messages in 2 places, right? So it's some sort of multicasting, broadcasting over the internet, which is very hard to do, and you cannot really do it with HTTP. And what if there are 100 applications? So now the person who sent the stream of data will have to send it to 100 places. Now this would be the push model. So what they do, they said, you know what? We're just going to publish our own REST service, and you come and you get the information you want every now and then when you care. So now all the other people who write their 100 applications would have to ping this service every minute, every 10 minutes to figure out if there are new ADT messages. So I think you start, and of course you add identity management and all that in the whole mix. You realize that at scale, if you write applications this way, the costs are gonna high rocket. But everybody is trying to look at the local optimum, and I don't think it's obvious that writing applications, as a humankind, is orders of magnitude more expensive than setting up even infrastructure for store and forward. There are many kind of streams of data that are public and people are interested in. I mentioned before the NOAA data, the weather data, the SEC, EDGAR data. So people do have streams of data to publish, but they would have to create really massive web servers, microservices for that, instead of delegating all this communication problem to trusted third parties. As I said, it's kind of done with blockchains. It's definitely done very well in the enterprise. Now I think we're gonna have to figure out how to bridge that gap and take what's in the enterprise or what's in blockchain and make it at global scale, kind of the way the DNS and SMTP servers are.
That's great. So come back with more questions after I let you know this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by LastPass. We know you can't trust your most valuable data with just any company, and that's why LastPass has been our choice for identity and access management, and we're not the only ones. LastPass has been named a leader in the G2 Fall Grid Reports, a leading peer-to-peer review site that provides unbiased user reviews on leading software solutions. Of the 746 customers that have left user reviews, 93% of LastPass users rated them 4 or 5 stars. What is it that makes LastPass so unique and vital for your business? Well, IT and security leaders can take back control of password security. They'll have the control they need from a central dashboard. Businesses can customize admin privileges, ensuring that any given admin has only the right level of access. You gain company-wide visibility that shows you actual process. No matter your organization's source of truth, LastPass integrates to onboard users, sync groups, and revoke access. LastPass also allows actionable insight for admins. You can access security scores. You can see real-time readouts of your business password hygiene and track improvements over time. You can review audit reports, build compliance, and maintain accountability with detailed reporting logs that tie actions to individuals. For every employee, you can view their password scores, gain access to shared accounts, monitor group memberships, and more. Your company can enable and require MFA, make logging in to different sites simple and easy while still being secure. The built-in password generator creates long randomized passwords that protect against hacking. Employees can easily and securely share passwords, notes, and other sensitive information through LastPass. Leverage over 100 policies and advanced security features, or use their out-of-the-box configurations for a balance between security and convenience. LastPass has won 8 awards so far this year. They are PC Mag's Editor's Choice. They won the Fortress Cybersecurity Award, and they are Business Insider's Best Overall Password Manager, just to name a few. Let the award-winning LastPass help you take back control of password security. Go to lastpass.com/twit. That's lastpass.com/twit. facebook.com/twit.
Hey, I want to jump back in if I can.
Yeah, so Jonathan,
I want to ask.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I want to ask more about this store and forward. As I listen to this store and forward, it's still a buzzword. It's still something that's up here, and I kind of want to sink my teeth into what this means on a more technical level. Are we basically talking about a caching server that sits in every ISP that will cache popular websites? I know Google already does something similar to this. In fact, my server down in Dallas, in the next rack over, there's a Google branded server, and apparently that's what it does. It has local storage for the most popular YouTube videos. Is that kind of the thing that we're talking about with Store and Forward?
Not really. Store and forward is a communication style in which you have it's called the broker, mediator, some trusted service in the middle that stores the message and forwards it to you later on. As an example, I can SMS you even if your phone is turned off and it's charging. And I don't really have to care about that fact. I let the ISP basically handle all that. I know that eventually you're gonna get the message. Another store and forward system that you're very familiar with is email. I use the SMTP server. I have stuff in my outbox. I send them to the SMTP server. In the spec, there's MTA and MUA. I'm not gonna talk about the mail user agent and mail transport agent, but the mail transport agent, the MTA, is responsible for basically forwarding the email to the server that serves your domain. DNS is involved in that, but I don't care about all that stuff. The email is going to be forwarded to you. It's more like a style than a particular service. And it's not new, obviously.
Right. I'm just trying to understand what this would actually look like for an end user on the internet.
Exactly like SMS.
So when we go to a website, an actual service, and I don't know what a good example of this would be, how is a store and forward model fundamentally different from what we already have on Facebook, YouTube, you name your service?
I'm trying to understand the question. In Facebook, with Facebook, you go in the browser, you log in with the Facebook web app or mobile app, and then you get synchronously information that is available on the platform, and the platform chooses to deliver to you. So you communicate directly with the other endpoint, and it's a synchronous communication. You ask, you get. An analogy of store and forward in the real world is the postal mailing system or the postal system, right? If I want to communicate with you, I'm gonna write my message on a paper. I'm gonna put it in an envelope. I'm gonna put your address. Addressing is a very important aspect of this, by the way, kind of like URLs. I put it in an envelope with your address on it, and I don't give it to you. I give it to the mailman. I put it in the blue postal box. When you get your information, you don't get it from me. You go to your inbox and you get your mail every now and then. Let's say probably once a day, twice a day. But for systems, it could be every 5 seconds.
Let me jump in here because I think there's a and I'm going to try to play back what I think I'm hearing from you at a high level and see if I'm wrong about that. What we have browser and HTTP is something that is actually inherently asynchronous, in the sense that our browser makes a request to see a file. That's what Tim Berners-Lee designed in the first place. You're going to look at a file. that we can use synchronously, and we're very used to using it synchronously. And we can listen to streams, we can watch streams, we can go to YouTube, and that's a synchronous kind of thing. And it appears to be synchronous. So it kind of has multiple purposes that way, and its general purpose nature has allowed it to cover a great deal of ground. But if you think about asynchronous stuff from the ground up, like what if we just want something that stays asynchronous but is really good at that? And in the real world, you brought up the post office. That's a we've improved on the post office. That is essentially a state system in all the countries of the world. It's basically a state system to begin with. But along comes FedEx and says, you know what, you can actually deliver overnight if you take an airport, a big airport in the middle of the country, and you just have a sorting facility there, and you have local sorting facilities on the periphery. This is Fred Smith's idea. And that he got a C for in grad school or whenever it was when he thought it up. But his basic idea was you can improve on the basic system that the post office had, and you can make it overnight by making this particular hack. In a similar way, Uber was a hack on dispatch, but it was an existing system, dispatch. And but here, what we have with the post office is, and what we have with SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is something that allows that kind of thing. What excites me, I think, what intrigues me anyway, is that there could be a zillion things that could be done if you start and stay in the asynchronous world, which you've only built out so far with email. How far off is that?
I think it's done at some level today, and there are very complex businesses like the shipping industry, right? They have to do not just the shipping, but insurances and all that. But I want to mention something. People, I don't know if people know, but Synchronous doesn't scale. It never did, it never will. Even HTTP and the streaming is based on TCP/IP, and TCP, like HTTP, is synchronous, but TCP is based on IP, which is not. And UDP is asynchronous as well. It's packet switching. For voice, we have voice over IP now, but before we had 64K kilohertz dedicated for voice bands, and we had the switching systems, and back in the 30s we had the operators with the wires and all that. I'm sure you remember those. You've seen these things. You cannot remember. But synchronous doesn't scale. Even the synchronous things we use today, and we think of them as synchronous, they are based on asynchronous packet switching communication at a very low level, which routers handle and all that. And then you mentioned FedEx. So all these require infrastructure. Telecommunication is infrastructure. So you can only build something scalable on top of infrastructure. And I don't think anybody's thinking today, I'm curious if somebody does, about building world level infrastructure, global infrastructure for messaging.
So I apologize. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. And I asked a question in the back chat, and Doc said I should ask you directly. What would an async Facebook look like for an end user? What kind of service would that look like?
Wow. I love this. Okay, so I'm not going to answer about Facebook yet, but let's talk about blogs first, which is the same thing, publishing content, right? So back in the day, RSS feeds, RSS readers, I think they were quite popular, right? And you had to basically add your RSS feeds in your reader, what you're looking for. But I would publish my content in using my tool. And I publish it not on a platform like Blogspot or Medium or LinkedIn or Facebook. I publish my information in my own tool, let's say on my own hard drive, or if I have a provider, whatever the provider does for the storage. And then you have the missing piece of let's call it discovery, but it's slightly different, that before with RSS readers was done manually, right? And right now it's done by the platform integrator who pushes recommendations to you. But it's kind of the same thing if you think. Now, let's say that every time I post or every time I have new content, my messaging, let's call it provider, publishes this information somewhere to all interested parties, be it YouTube, Facebook, Medium, whatnot. And then they can aggregate on their platform whatever they want. But I didn't publish there. I published in my own environment, and it was broadcasted, we can talk about intent casting as well, to whomever is interested. And the consumers will use the integrator they want, or their own integrator. They subscribe to whomever they are interested in. You need some sort of a search engine. That's the discovery I'm talking about. We probably need to get more into detail. But that's the difference, that I don't publish on a platform. I publish my data, and that then aggregators, platforms subscribe and then try to reach out to their consumers. And the consumers the same way. They look at the content in their own platform. It's kind of like everybody having his own Facebook by subscribing to whatever they want to subscribe to, and they discover what's available via some sort of search engine a la Google for this kind of environment infrastructure. Is it getting clearer? I don't want to talk too much about that because I want to focus on the questions you actually have.
I believe I have just had a eureka moment. And the reason I want to dig into this is because you two are so very excited about it, I can tell. And I'm over here, and I have just, until just a moment ago, essentially no understanding of what you're talking about. And I've discovered that when I don't understand what's being talked about, there's a large percentage of our audience that also doesn't understand. I'm a good audience proxy in my simplicity sometimes. But here,
I don't understand either.
let me reframe, kind of rephrase what I just heard in the way that I would put it, and you tell me if I'm on the same track. Please. You're talking about decentralization. You're talking about building your own platforms rather than relying on a big centralized platform like Facebook or Google, and then using some technology like RSS, for instance, or whatever technology replaces RSS, to allow people to, of their own volition, tune into everybody else's little micro platforms. Is that what we're talking about with async, store, and forward? Is it the same idea as decentralization?
Aside from questioning the term platform that you chose, yes, absolutely. That's what we're talking about. Micro platform. But yeah, it's like it's my own platform instead of a platform that's imposed to me, if you want. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay, awesome. I'm extremely excited to be back on the same page, and it suddenly makes way more sense why this is something that the Apache Foundation and an Apache guy like yourself is very interested in, because this is kind of the same revolution that Apache gave us when suddenly everybody can stand up their own web server on their own little Linux box in their bedroom, like a bunch of us did 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Right. And imagine that I have my own Facebook for my family to consume or whatnot. Sponsored by me, not by ads, for instance.
Right. I have to ask then, is there a project out there right now that is doing this? Or are we still kind of in the planning phases of being able to host our own miniature Facebook?
That's a tough question. I think the technology, a lot of it actually does exist. The issue is not with technology. And the problem, I think, is more around the infrastructure and the willingness of some micro platforms or some player to start to collaborate. That's what I'm trying to figure out right now myself. Who'd be interested? Definitely not the big players who want to maintain the status quo. I am in this phase myself to discover who would be interested in putting together the existing technologies to achieve that. Blockchains are such an example. I helped one of the EOS block producers to go live 2 years ago when EOS started in June 2018. And they all look for use cases that can be done on blockchain. But all this messaging has nothing to do with blockchain. You can add trust qualities on top of it using blockchains. But people who want to do this in blockchain, and Hyperledger is such a place, I think they are are conflating too much in the technology, and for that reason it's gonna be hard to get adoption. Anyway, I don't really have an answer for you, and if you get one, I'd be very interested in knowing it myself.
Well, we are so close out of time now, and I wish we had more. But we'll come back. I mean, we'll revisit this and many other things. We'll have you back on the show. We always close with a series of questions. One is about blockchain. You've already dealt with blockchain. I'd just like to go to is there any question we haven't asked you could answer briefly? Is there one of those?
Not off the top of my head, but I hope we're going to have more opportunities.
Well,
one thing I
where
want to mention.
Could go, Jonathan. Or was that you?
I didn't know LastPass is a sponsor, but I got to say I'm a very happy user for almost a decade. It's a technology that I myself use and I would recommend as well.
Which is that? I'm sorry, I missed
LastPass.
Oh, LastPass. Oh, wonderful. Our sponsor gets a plug from the guest. Fantastic.
Well, I use it. I used it for a long time. They will know in their records for how long, but and never had any issues with it except once when I lost my master password. And if you lose your master password, that's it. But I remembered it, so I was lucky.
You.
Of course, you can store. They have features there, but anyway, it's a very, very good product.
Well, thank you so much. So, very last question: what are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
I use VI. Shows my age. I use brackets. I use Eclipse. I use quite a few, and I don't have a preference for a technology or another. They are just tools that do the job. It's like asking somebody what's his favorite power tool, I guess. I mean, a carpet something.
I find myself asking too. How many shell windows do you have open right now? Or did you have
right now not many because I closed them, but tabs I in Chrome I have like
you close them.
probably over 100, and people who see me think I'm crazy. But the question applied to languages is an interesting one because that fascinated me, and Java was a favorite. C++ was my favorite back in the 90s. Fantastic language. Java was very good. After Oracle took over, I'm not a fan. JavaScript, very good language as well, but my all-time favorite is actually Lisp. And Clojure is nice, but I would really like to see Lisp coming back because I think it's the best design language ever.
I have so many friends that love Lisp and lament its. I don't think it's ever gone away, but it has certainly. We'll have to have somebody on here, a committee of people talking about Lisp. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Hadrian. We look forward to having you back, and I look forward to talking to you anyway because there are too many things we're working on in any case. So thanks so much. So Jonathan, how'd that go for you? I mean, that was a bit of a whirlwind.
It was. We talk about this so many times, but I'm not sure that it's ever been so true as today. We could have gone on for hours with him. So we had in our back notes probably 6 or 7 or 8 different topics, and I think we got to all of 2 of them. We talked about. I know we had a lot of. We talked about the Apache Foundation, which was super interesting to kind of get some insight into how they try to run their projects, and then we started talking about. what you guys call asynchronicity, or the store and forward method, and this is a concept that I've thought about a lot. I've just never ever heard it called that. In the worlds where I think about it, we call it either decentralization or build your own platforms. Is another term that gets thrown around, and it's the idea of there is a huge problem with everybody being beholden to these, well, essentially three big technology companies that all exist in California in the United States, or on the West Coast. We need, and this is the beauty of open source. This is the beauty of Apache. You've got to be able to give people the ability to build their own platforms for so many reasons. One, when Google has a hiccup and goes down, then the entire world stops working, essentially. Two, if you happen to be on the other side of a certain issue, as Google is, and they deplatform you, then your world stops. And there are people discovered that on Twitter, all the different platforms. You give a whole lot of power over your life to the middle management at Choose Your Platform. But three, there are so many interesting things that you can do with technology, and it's a shame to say, well, we've got to wait for Google or Twitter or Facebook or Microsoft to roll that feature out. Whereas with open source, we say, this interests me enough, I'm going to go build it myself and submit a pull request. And I think that's just an amazing ability that open source has given us, that this kind of decentralization, this build your own platform has given us. And yeah, that is super exciting. But again, it took me 95% of the show to finally make the connection that, that's what we're all talking about.
Yeah, I have one even more short on time, but one fantastic example of which we touched on of how that works is what Dave Weiner did with RSS. He looked at publishing, and he looked at, actually, it was something at Netscape called Rich Site Summary or something like that. He rebranded it Really Simple Syndication, and just created this simple way that you could syndicate a blog, which at the time he was doing it, and you can still do it with WordPress or a lot of some other platforms if you want, but it's not even a platform. You just have some code, and you send it to a ping server, I guess, that says, I published this, and then somebody can retrieve it. They can go find it that way. And all of podcasting got built on that. And on top of all of blogging, all of it was asynchronous. It's inherently asynchronous. But really, I didn't get into the show as deeply as I could have the connection between asynchrony and personal independence and all of that. It's kind of like talking to Hadrian. It's a little bit like being an archaeologist and having this guy over here saying, have you looked at under this rock over here? There's some interesting stuff over here, and I never thought of looking there, and there it is. Anyway, this has been great. So thank you, everybody. This has been Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Next week, I believe we're going to have Adrian Gropper, whose first name, Adrian, is Hadrian with the H dropped, and both of them were born in Romania. So there's that little connection, totally different topic, but look forward to having him next week. So thanks so much. This has been Floss Weekly, and we'll see you next time.
Want more TWiT? Check out Tech News Weekly, twit.tv/TNW. Tech News Weekly is a show where Jason Howell and I bring the latest and greatest interviews to you from the people making and breaking the tech news. twit.tv/TNW.